we can do anything if we put our minds to it. I'm driven, I'm motivated, I'm outcomes focused, and that shows up for me in my approach to deadlines. Integrity and impartiality are two key principles that I think should be embraced across civil services across the world. I really am the CEO, Chief Operation Officer, Chief Financial Officer. I'm the cleaner, I'm the coffee maker. I really do everything. It's been said before, I'm very loyal, I'm honest, and I'm also very experienced focused. So in other words, I'm not materialistic. Keep learning, meet new people, ask questions. Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, then it's not the end.
I am your host, Gaurav Garg, and we welcome all our viewers to our show, Amazing Mentor. Today with us is Miss Rachel. She is non-executive board member at British Horn-Market Council. She has extensive international experience in working in and with European Union and international organizations like Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, World Bank, the British Standard Institution, United Nations, PTB, DT Global. She is experienced in public affairs and talented at developing authentic relationships with private and public sector stakeholders. Experienced and calm leader in event and crisis management in UK government, London Olympics, Hurricane Katrina, London bombing. It's a pleasure to welcome Ms. Rachel to our show, Amazing Mentor. Welcome, ma'am.
Gaurav, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here with you today and all your listeners.
Thank you for your time and accepting our request. So we will start directly from your childhood. So tell us, how was you as a student?
As a student, I was very studious. So I've always been very curious as a child. So much so that when I was very young, still living in London, I decided I really wanted to look at some encyclopedias that my parents had. And I couldn't manage to open the door. So I used my head to smash through. And I think that really well describes my approach as a student. I've always been curious, always wanting to know, why do things happen as they do? And that question that children ask a lot, why? Why is it like this? Why do things work like that?
So what about your teachers? Any particular teacher which have great influence on your life?
Yes, a few actually. So when I was in primary school, I had a wonderful teacher, Mrs. Lewis, I think her name was. I say I think because we moved when I was only 7. So memories can be a little bit difficult to retrieve. But she was wonderful. She encouraged me to cook. So I love cooking. This is a lifelong passion of mine. And baking. And this is something that she really inspired me to do and to enjoy. And at secondary school, I had two wonderful history teachers who really inspired. They linked to my desire to know why. And, this is what history is all around, trying to interpret why things have happened the way they have. And I had a games teacher when I was at primary school who saw that I was quite competitive, and both competitive with other people, but especially with myself. So she really inspired my love of netball. And I got up to nearly playing to county level because of her great encouragement and coaching. And her name was Mrs. Brasher.
So what about your education background, schooling and higher education?
Well, I went to the largest, as it was then, comprehensive school in the county of Essex in England. And that's now become what they know as an academy. And that was quite a shock for me, because when we left London, I went from a very small Catholic school to a village school with only a few hundred people who lived in the village at the time. And I really enjoyed primary school. It was a lovely place to grow up. We were by the sea. There was a lot of great things that we did. But then secondary school came and we had two schools. We had a lower and an upper school because of the sheer number of students that there were. So I felt very much like a big fish in a small pond going to the ocean and being a tiny angelfish. So it took a while to find my feet, but I enjoyed study. I've always enjoyed learning. School for me was really interesting time, and one where I was able to pursue my academic interests, but also to get involved with sports. I've always really liked, for example, cross-country running, netball, a little bit of tennis. I'm not so good at tennis, but I do like to get out and have a knockabout. And then I went to university.
So any particular memory from your school or university time? Any notorious activity?
Well, university was a really interesting time. So aside from the fact you live by yourself for the first time, you've got to run a household, I really liked the extracurricular activity. So I was co-chair of the International Relations Society, and we did many things. The highlight for me was when we organised a trip to European Union institutions. For example, the International Criminal Tribunal for post-Yugoslavia. So, for example, Slobodan Milosevic, who I'm sure you and viewers will have heard about, he was sort of put up with the tribunal. So we went to visit a lot of, for example, that, and also the International Court and lots of the European Union institutions. So that for me was a great trip. We organised it as the society, and we were able to get both our lecturers and ourselves as students on that trip. So it was a really great learning experience to put into practice things that we'd read about.
So as a child, what was your dream profession?
Oh, my dream profession. Well, I had a few. First, I wanted to be an astronaut, which, I think was quite a common aspiration as a young child, sort of growing up in the 70s and 80s. And then I wanted to be a journalist. And so writing for me has always been an important part of what I do and what I enjoy. And I went on to have work experience. So I spent 2 weeks with a local paper, and I was the first ever work experience person to actually be published. So I managed to get my articles on the front page and the middle pages, which is considered the two best pages to have. So I managed to fulfill some of that, and also I now write. So yes, but astronaut, I haven't quite fulfilled that ambition yet.
So any particular influence for thinking that you want to be an astronaut or a journalist?
Well, influence about being an astronaut, I think, really comes from television. Watching these amazing sort of technological leaps that were made at very early stages in my life. And also my father was very interested in space. So, he'd witnessed on television the first landing on the moon. So he was always, I think, inspired by that and really believed we can do anything if we put our minds to it. So that certainly was the link there. And as for writing, I think really that just came from me. There wasn't sort of anyone who I thought, wow, I want to emulate them, except I always liked to read, and I loved the way and wanted to understand more about how can authors come up with these wonderful ideas. Is it part of their life story? Is it people they know, or is it their imagination? So I was always curious about that.
So what about your hobbies and interests?
So hobbies and interests now, well, I love to read. So I'm always got at least 2 or 3 novels, so fiction on the go. But I'm also very interested in self-development. So I've always got either some podcasts going, or I'm reading articles, for example, from Harvard Business Review, and trying to just sort of learn more about the human nature and our brains. And at the moment, I'm really fascinated in neuroplasticity, how people can change and how we can change those patterns of our beliefs and how that translates into our action. But when I'm doing less of, should we say, the cerebral part, I'm swimming. You'll find me walking. I love walking in the hills. I live in the Peak District in the UK. It's a very hilly area, very beautiful, but I love to swim, ideally in the sea, but if not, I'll take a reservoir or a river. I'll swim in a swimming pool if I have to, if there are no other sources, but that really refreshes and rejuvenates me. And cooking, I love to bake, and eating with friends. So whether that's, at home or whether that's out trying a new restaurant, those are some of my favorite hobbies.
So can you tell me about any particular moment when a person's kindness made a difference in your life?
Yes. Probably the one I'd pick most is when I was having a difficult time at work. We all have them from time to time. I suppose my story was this. I was in the middle of a relationship that was breaking down, and we had a great deal of pressure on us at work. We'd had a new government to be elected, so a coalition government, which is very unusual for us in the UK. It had never happened in my memory as serving in the job. And I was feeling quite emotional. And I'm a firm believer of owning your feelings, but I wouldn't usually do this. I just sort of started quietly crying at my desk. And one of my colleagues noticed, came up to see if I was okay, could see I wasn't, and took me out for a walk. And we went to a nearby park and just sat, watched the ducks, and went for a walk. And they didn't ask me to tell them what was wrong. They could just see what I needed was a break, to see the birds, to refresh myself with some air and regain some perspective. So that was one of the kindest things I've ever experienced.
So when did it strike your mind that you want to be a political analyst?
Well, I was very lucky to get a scholarship to do my master's course. So that would have been back in 1999. And like many graduates, certainly at that time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But the dean at my undergraduate college said, I think you should go on and study further. So when I received a scholarship, I said, great, that's what I'll do. And towards the end of that time, because it's less than a year, you start in September, you're finished completely in May, I thought, well, what am I qualified to do? What do I think I can actually do? So I put in a number of applications, primarily for government departments. I was sure I wanted to work for the civil service because that really chimed with my values. I'm not, for example, primarily motivated by money, right? I'm not primarily motivated by possessions. I'm motivated by wanting to do the right thing and to support people and to help people become the best they can. So that's when it struck me. So back in 2000, and I made a number of applications, including to the job where I first started with the Defence Evaluation Research Agency. So they're a part of the Ministry of Defence in the UK.
So where did you start your professional journey?
Well, it was back in 2000. So I had many different sort of career, what would we call them? Sojourns in between. So, for example, before university, then at university, I worked as a nursing auxiliary. So providing support to people who were either too elderly and too infirm to look after themselves, or unfortunately were suffering from a terminal illness. But when I started my work professionally, if you like, in an office, that was back in 2000, down in Portsmouth, which is a beautiful area on the south coast of England, for an organisation called DERA. They're now called DSTL, Defence Science Technology Laboratories. And I suppose I was qualified for that because my master's was in a Master's of Economics in Strategic Studies, which is all around the use or the threat of use of force in the international system.
So how was your first day and what was your first task?
My first day, Gaurav, well, that was really interesting. Luckily, I had some inkling of what to expect as I'd been there for interview. But let me just paint a picture for you. So it's this military base, which is really what it is. with lots of different radars and equipment on top of the hill, because that's the highest place. And not surprisingly, there's a lot of security. So if you drive in or you take your bicycle, you're searched. You have the underside of your car searched just to check there's nothing under there. So I think if I hadn't been for the interview, I'd have been really shocked. But luckily, I knew to expect that. And really, my first day was spent being introduced to everyone that I was going to be directly working with and those in the office doing things that I might come into contact with. So I was quite exhausted by the end of that first day.
So what was your first task?
My first task was research. So back then, and remember I'm talking over 20 years ago, we did a lot of matrix working, which I think was quite unusual in the UK. So really, I had a lot of people I was accountable to. I had one line manager, but lots of people I was accountable to. So my first task really was to work out who was who, right? So who am I accountable to? And also they gave me a small research project which had to be done within 3 days, as we were going to be going to London to present the research to what they used to call then main building. In other words, the head office for Ministry of Defence. So there was a lot of internet research, talking to people, trying to sort of find out what exactly we needed to do in order to get our outcome delivered. So it was quite a lot to do in 3 days.
So what were your initial days challenges and how did you overcome those challenges?
So initially, it was just such a big change from studying, right? So you go from, I've studied at University of Wales, Aberystwyth, a very nice, beautiful coastal town. You'll spot a connection there. I like the coast. And suddenly I was in work and I was trying to really work out, well, who is this organisation? What do they do? Where are my strengths? How do I fit in? And one of the things that I sort of did to help myself with these challenges or further my understanding was to develop networks. So I tried to find out as much as I could about the people I was working with. And then there were opportunities for example, going to yoga, joining a sailing club. So I took all of those opportunities up so I could get to know people, because I'd moved country. I moved from Wales back to England. I didn't know anyone in that area. So it was an entire change for me. So I tried to build up a professional and a personal support network because it was such a big change.
So that means to meet up your challenges, networking was the main support behind.
Yes.
So how was your experience working with training of civil servant in Kosovo?
Oh, wow. A real privilege and a pleasure. So Kosovo is a country, although not recognized as a country by everyone yet. And after the collapse of Yugoslavia and the very many problems there, Kosovo was, back then when I was working there, really not very long out of conflict. And so I was really pleased to have been able to support the centre of government. So I worked with the Prime Minister's office to try and help them identify priorities and also to shape how civil servants could and should be doing their jobs. Where could they have most impact? How could they prioritise? And just to give you an example, with one group, I worked with them on codes of corporate governance. So, for example, how can private sector expertise help Kosovo when they were setting up their rules of procedure for government, and how they should interact with businesses, enable growth of domestic businesses, but also how could they deal with foreign directed business interests too. So really fascinating, an absolute privilege to have been able to do that, and some of the best coffee I've ever tasted in Kosovo.
So what's your style of training and what all different professional do you train?
So my style, I'm very interactive. So because of my background, I'm a theorist by nature. So for those of our listeners who know about learning styles, I'm a very strong theorist. But I also have quite strong reflector and activist traits, which means that I know firsthand that for people to learn best, we need multiple different ways to engage them. So when I'm working with people, I always try and develop that as part of the curricula. So first of all, I say very interactive. Secondly, I always look for a particular challenge that a group might be facing. So for example, Gaurav, somebody might approach me and say, I've got a problem. I need to train my staff in project management techniques. And sometimes once you spend some time with an organization and individuals and learn more about what's happening, what they're telling you and what you're observing can be different than the person who's procuring your services. So sometimes when the CEO or one of the C-suite is saying, I've got a problem with project management, what they're saying is, I'm not getting the information I need to make the best decisions. So I'll often do a little bit of investigatory work just to make sure that what people have said they need is really what they need, and they're not more symptomatic of other wider issues. So for example, with that client, there were issues about accountability. And if you sort of are well familiar with project management methodology, this idea of RACI, who's responsible, accountable, who needs to be consulted, who needs to be involved, there wasn't really a thorough understanding of that within the organisation. So I will often spend some time working out, is what we've been asked to do actually what is needed? And also, are there other things here? When working with other countries, for example, I'm often asked to help support the introduction of a new law or the development of economic impact assessment. And with those countries, I will always ask, okay, what evidence can we use? And if you're thinking about impact assessment, let's use a case study, a current policy challenge that you are having or another ministry are having. Because in my experience, the best learning is sustainable when it's based on a current challenge. So they say that if you have not put training into effect within 7 days of finishing, you will lose at least 50% of it. So that's why we need to do something that's completely relevant to them.
So what is the role of technology in your training?
Technology, Gaurav, great question. Well, since COVID, it's the primary delivery platform. And so, for example, I'm very conversant with Teams, with Zoom, and occasionally other platforms if someone's particularly keen to try them. I'll have, for example, online workbooks that people can fill out. I use quizzes, just things to make sure that we're engaging the audience as much as possible. It's really hard for us to maintain interest. You know, even when we are interested, our brains are starting to disappear off to think about dinner or childcare or whatever it is for us, going for a walk. So I love technology. I think it can be really transformative. I still do like working in person. There's something really special about that. You know, shaking someone's hand or looking at them in the eye, sharing a coffee together, just catching up. So I think there's a place for the two.
So how has been your working experience with India?
With India. So I'm so honoured and thrilled to have had a number of years working with stakeholders, both within the Indian government and externally. So my primary interaction was with the Ministry of Trade and Investment, which may well have changed its name again, but the ministry who was there to ensure that domestic businesses could thrive and to understand how to get the best out of foreign directed investment. And I work really closely, for example, with some of the business associations and chambers, and I worked across many different states. So it's been a real delight. I've got to see some amazing use of technology actually in India. So for example, your phone, taking photographs of where there are problems and submitting those to the municipality so that that could be addressed quickly. I've seen one-stop shops being created and the use of technology to try and reduce the amount of interaction that an individual officer might have with a business, which occasionally can give rise to rent-seeking behaviour if the system, isn't quite working well, or if there are one or two individuals where there are challenges. But I'm so fortunate because I absolutely love India. You can see perhaps by the colour of my clothes, I love bright colours. I love Indian food. I could give you a list of the best places to have a biryani or what my favourite foods are from each region. But yeah, it's been a fascinating experience, sometimes challenging. Maybe I'll say a little bit about that. I remember I'm talking a few years ago, but as a woman and working with government, there were occasions that I had to really use my poker face. I'll give you a couple of examples. So one day I was sitting with my male colleague. We both had the same job title, and the gentleman who'd invited us to speak leant over and said, "Excuse me, miss, can I just check your job title?" So I told him. He said, "But that's not possible, because that's Sir's title." And I said, "Oh, yes, it's a title that denotes grade in the UK civil service." I said, "But that's not possible because that's Sir's title." And then I realised he was trying to intimate it perhaps isn't possible because I'm a woman to have the same job title as my male colleague. And so I looked at him and I think he realised, I have possibly offended one of my guests here. So there are a couple of occasions on that. So there have been challenges, but all in all, amazing place, and I really hope to come out again soon. If not for work, then to vacation.
So you have worked with different governments of different countries. Which government policy do you like the most and why?
Oh, this one is so difficult, Gaurav. So difficult. For me, it has to be around any policy that prioritizes well-being, right? So, and I could pick many countries here. But a recent innovation, so thinking about my own regulatory experience, a recent innovation that I really liked was in the Philippines. So the government of the Philippines introduced something that's called the Philippine Good Regulatory Principles, the PGRP. And what I liked about that was they were doing a lot of work around dealing with corruption. And, I'm sure many of our listeners will know it's a challenge that all of our countries face at points. And they've taken some quite strong steps to try and legislate out corruption. In other words, if you're an officer in government, it really is 3 strikes and you're removed and you won't get a pension, you won't get paid, quite draconian in terms of other countries. So they've done a great job at dealing with that. And I think one of the areas that they then looked to do was, how can we incentivize government departments to do the right thing, to have integrity, to demonstrate that they are listening to stakeholders, to, for example, how will they engage with stakeholders? What's the service level agreement between government and business? So they introduced these principles, and it was a really positive way of expressing the desire to improve the business climate, but also to remove corruption. So I'd say that's one of my most favourites.
So what do you think? Corruption and progress are interlinked or not?
I think ideally, and there's a lot of international indices on this, but I think ideally to progress well and sustainably, So I think anyone can progress quickly, right? But to have ongoing sustainable progress, you need to have a system that values and promotes integrity. Because where we don't have integrity, then that's where we have chinks and opportunities for exploitation and manipulation. And that for me is what corruption can be. Now, corruption, personally, I think one of the oft neglected causes is, are the government paying their civil servants a sufficiently high amount of money to give them a living? Or do they need to, are they almost being forced to seek additional sources of income? So, for example, get another job, or to indulge in rent-seeking behaviour because they don't have sufficient income. So do I think progress and corruption go together or are mutually exclusive? Well, I personally think they're connected, but in a sustainable growth situation, the society's approach to corruption, it isn't welcomed, and also it's dealt with. So it's dealt with swiftly, openly and transparently, so that can put people off. I've done some work in Montenegro. And Montenegro, another country in the Balkans, who were involved, obviously, with the breakup of Yugoslavia. That's something that affected them deeply also. One of the things that they did was, by working with the United Nations Development Programme, was to create an app that enabled citizens to anonymously report suspected misuse of government resources. So, say, for example, if you saw a government car at the beach at the weekend. Now, ministers aren't supposed to use their cars at the weekend, so who is using it? Is it the minister? Is it the official? So a citizen could take a photograph, send it off, and it was all done anonymously. What that did was increase trust. So it was about reporting behaviour that was, shall we say, socially unacceptable / corruption, depending on your view of that example, for example. But secondly, it built trust in systems and processes. So it increased transparency and increased trust. And they also piloted and adopted another scheme that when people were reported against, say, for example, if you suspected a business wasn't paying taxes, you could report that anonymously. If that was found to be the case, and if the government successfully managed to reclaim the money, then a large proportion of that money would go to a cause that the public could vote on. So you're linking reducing corruption with a societal impact. And that's where I think, to answer your question in a very long way, that's how we can successfully address corruption and ensure that progress is unimpinged.
So what's your opinion if I say a statement which says public should be treated as clients by government?
Oh, 100% agree. And I think it's one of the reasons where we in government are looking to reform either our approach, our mindsets, for example, as a civil servant, or to make a radical change for the delivery of services without that understanding that the public, citizens, are who you are accountable to. I think efforts are often wasted, or the change isn't as quick as it could be. And I've seen that in many countries, including the UK. As far back now, I suppose it must have been around 2010, when the idea came that the public does not care. So say, Gaurav, you want to apply for a passport in the UK. Should I ask you to know which government department is responsible for that? That shouldn't be relevant. What you should need to know is, where and how do I apply? So you should be able to just Google that, or go on one government platform, gov.uk, to undertake that process. Now, we're very good now at doing that. However, that came from many years of learning. And Gaurav, let me tell you, I was in the civil service at the time, and I had the job of persuading many of my colleagues who just couldn't understand, their view was, but we're the department. Well, why does it matter? If people just have to Google, then they can come on our departmental website and apply for the service. And actually, if you start thinking as that's the level of poor service you'll deliver. You need to always put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're providing the service for, because otherwise you make assumptions, you make mistakes, and you forget your priorities will be different to theirs. So I 100% agree with your statement.
So how important are deadlines for you, and what extent do you go to meet your deadlines?
So I'm smiling at this question. I am very deadline focused. So, I'm a believer in self-development. I'm doing my coaching masters at the moment. So I'm always undertaking personality assessments and 360 assessments. And one of the things that routinely comes up is I'm driven, I'm motivated, I'm outcomes focused. And that shows up for me in my approach to deadlines. So I really see a deadline as sacrosanct. If I can't meet it, something comes up. Life always happens, right? I'm in touch with the person straight away to renegotiate for a number of reasons, but primarily because of trust. If you don't meet your deadlines, you will erode trust, right? Fundamentally. So even if it's bad news, in my experience, it's far better to talk to someone. Secondly, they may be a little bit like me. So I always tend to have contingency deadlines. So I'll set a deadline, but actually there might be a few more days in between because often things go wrong. So say, for example, if I'm a program manager and I'm waiting for 5 project managers to report, I'd be able to tell you, well, they always report before time. They report to me on the day. This person's at least a day late, and this person never responds unless I have to call them up or go and see them. So I set contingency deadlines. And I suppose the last thing to say around the deadlines, my approach to them is, when someone sets a deadline or when I'm involved with establishing a deadline, I will always check in, is that deadline realistic, or are there other competing priorities? And also, when I'm working with people, they might be working on many different things. And so they need to understand actually what is the outcome I want. And maybe if they can't quite meet my desired deadline, could they do something that approximates what I want and need if the deadline is the main issue rather than the outcome being delivered? So I think negotiation's really key, but I think ultimately for me, it's about trust. If you don't meet your deadlines, it risks the relationship. So we just have to negotiate.
So what do you think? What are the major areas that need complete change as far as civil service policies are concerned?
Oh, wow. So that's really interesting. I think it partly depends which area of the world we're looking at. But having said that, I do think there are a number of principles that I hold that are different in different areas. So let me say something about that. So for example, when you join the civil service, you have to sign up to the Civil Service Code, which has a set of principles, including impartiality, right? So the idea being whatever colour, creed or politics of a government that's in place, you should be considering yourself as providing the service to citizens, and you are accountable to whoever's in power. But just because, for example, if you have a different political set of beliefs than the people who are currently in power, that shouldn't determine how you act. And for me, that's really important. And personally speaking, it's one of the things that if I were, say, in charge of the United Nations, that is something I would personally champion. I've seen countries where that isn't the case, where public servants are really political appointees, yeah. And in many countries transitioning, for example, in the Balkans, that's often the case. In America, that's predominantly the case. But in my view, the UK's got the system not badly designed. So for the political situations, you have a SPAD, a special advisor that the minister appoints. And they will give a view as to, well, how will this look in terms of your speech here, or what you want to sort of achieve at the end of your premiership, as opposed to wider policies, which I think that integrity and impartiality are two key principles that I think should be embraced across civil services across the world.
So what's your day-to-day work routine look like?
The day-to-day work routine, so it can differ. So for example, if I'm having a working from home day as opposed to being in an office day, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. A working from home day, depending which client I'm working for, if it's in the UK, for example, or someone where the time difference isn't very different, say Germany, for example, I always try and do a little bit of exercise before I start the day. I find it refreshes me, it puts me in the mood for work. So I'll always have a nice cup of fruit tea to start, make sure I've had a little bit for breakfast, some exercise, sit down with a strong cup of coffee, then I'll check my calendar. You know, what's coming up? I use my to-do list. It will be embedded within my calendar. So, and I build myself in those deadlines. So I'll check, what are the outcomes for today? Where am I? What do I need to prioritize first? And so if I'm training, for example, training will usually start somewhere around the 9 o'clock time. So I'll have to, be up with enough time, make sure the technology's working, the dreaded Zoom updates have all been done before we log on. And if it's a training day, then I usually finish around 4:30. So that's what, a training day could look like, for example. If it's working with a client in the UK, then I'll be traveling somewhere. So I live in a beautiful area. I could be traveling 2 to 5 hours. So I work on the train. The internet service is brilliant. And then I'll be with them either working on particular sort of consultancy that they want, or I might be coaching a client. It all depends. But what I always try and do during the day is make time to get out for a walk, because I just find that helps to ground me and remind me that I'm part of a bigger world. And also to listen to a podcast. So, just something to keep my mind active, perhaps away from the immediate work, but thinking about the future and what I'm interested in exploring next.
So what are your day-to-day challenges?
Day-to-day challenges. They can be, as I think some people would expect them, who are also self-employed. So I run my own business. I am CEO, CFO, COO. I literally do everything. So I have an accountant, but like many businesses who have an accountant, they're not there to make decisions. They're there to give you advice. And I try and automate as much as I can, because I find some things just sort of energy draining. So for example, doing expenses. And getting ready for the VAT return. So because I know that's a challenge for me, because I can literally feel myself go, oh no, then I try and do things little and often so that it isn't a big build up, because that for me is the worst. It's like if you ever put your homework off, you knew you had to do it, and then you'd be like, oh no, why have I done this again? So the admin side, sometimes I'm less enthusiastic about. I can find that challenging. And also things like doing your invoices. I genuinely prefer to get on and do the work. I'm excited about the work. I'm less enthusiastic about the administration. So those are some of the challenges. Another, I guess, is to make sure I prioritize time for my business. As I say, I run everything. So I need to be in charge of marketing. I need to be in charge of continued professional development. So at the moment, I'm completing a master's level qualification in coaching and mentoring. And my next exciting journey is I'm looking to become a chartered manager with the Chartered Management Institute in the UK, who are really great at continued professional development. So I build in the time. That's the stuff that excites me. So I sort of squeeze in the admin, force myself to do it, and I incentivize myself with more exciting things to do, or set deadlines, 15 minutes to complete this invoice, and then you can go for a walk.
So what are your major achievements as per your professional journey?
Major achievements. Well, there's one area I'm really proud of. Back in 2003 or 4, back in 2004, pretty sure it's 4, might have to check that now. When we had the UK presidency of the Council of the EU, it was a very, very tricky summer. So we had flooding and fires all across Europe. And when you have that role in the European Union, you run the crisis centre. So and you don't really get training in this. Luckily, I was working for the Civil Contingency Secretariat in the Cabinet Office. So I had experience, for example, of participating in COBRA, which is our emergency response forum at government level. But it was really interesting I suppose we had to learn on the job. And one of the things that I had to do was to negotiate space in several flights from a big firm, who I won't name, but space to send supplies to the affected countries in Europe. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of, because at that stage, I'd only been in the civil service, I think, it would have been 3 years. And I didn't really feel like I had a great deal of experience. But I found that by using contacts and, just opening up and asking, quite literally, look, we need to do this. What can we do? Is there any way? Can we assist? Can we help? So that's one of the things I'm most proud of, as is being involved with the 2012 Olympic Games. I mean, what an amazing thing that we did in the UK. I'm so proud of the fact we managed to put on a fantastic show. We had so many people come to visit us, and we were lucky. We had a great summer, but the events were wonderful, and I think we all collectively did a great job at showing, what's great about Great Britain. So that was a fantastic experience too.
So any heart-touching problem you came across in your journey, and what solution did you provide for that particular problem?
Let me just pick one. So I worked with an absolutely fantastic member of staff. Now, a little bit in the way that these things used to happen in the civil service. I don't think they do now, but I became a line manager by default. I was told one day, well, you manage these people. Okay, whatever that means, right? And then about 6 months later, I went on sort of an in-house course that was developed by civil service. But in the interim, one of my members of staff, she was losing her sight. And it was, I think, incredibly difficult to do. So imagine you're born with your sight, and because of a degenerative condition, you are gradually losing it to the point where you'll become blind, and you'll, really have to live with that big life change. And in terms of challenges, I really did my best to support them and to understand, aside from what can we do in terms of adjustments, but what do you want? What sort of life do you want? And how do you want to be engaged at work, right? What can we do so that you can add the value that you have? And this was at a time where I'd say the legislation around disability equality was still fairly new, right? So there was still a long way for us to go as a society to enable people who had a disability to properly engage and to give their value back to society, which, you know, for all of us who are able-bodied, it's just made a lot easier. And so that for me has been the start, though, of a lifelong friendship. And this person, who I won't name her, but she knows who she is, she is fearless. So, for example, we have been on a cycling holiday on a tandem. Now, she'd never ridden a tandem before. So I was at the front and we went careering down extremely difficult hills, which it was better not to tell her about because it was a lot harder to walk with the bike rather than cycle on it. And we've been ice skating together. So we'd have to hide her stick as we walked up because otherwise they wouldn't allow her on. And then I would be her guide, and I've accompanied her to the most amazing sort of experiences and been her visual guide. So that for me is one of the most humbling experiences and rewarding experiences I've had.
So in your years of career, you have worked for different countries in policy making. Which was the most challenging task of all, and how did you succeed in it?
Again, many we could choose here. Let me focus on one. So I was working with a particular country to help them improve their policy making. So how is it that government evaluates the potential costs and benefits of a policy, right? And they had an area they wanted to look at. It was franchising. So, for example, you know, the notion of having a subway wherever you are, if you're in America, if you're in India, if you're in the UK, that the standard of sandwich that you receive should be the same, right? Because they franchise out the systems of operations, and the idea is that it should be replicated across the world. So this country was considering the pros and the cons of franchising. Now, one of the challenges was that the ministries did not collaborate. They didn't cooperate. And in fact, there seemed to be a rather interesting sort of subculture going on where some people were intimating that the evidence and the data that we were looking for would have to be paid for in order to be freed up. And from my perspective, you know, working from the UK government, where we do many things right, but one of the things I think that's gone really well is opening up data. So, you know, this notion of open data. We were one of the founding partners for the Open Government Partnership, which champions that. Open up government workings through data, let citizens, businesses, whoever wants to look at it, use it and come up with ideas for improvement or their own businesses, do that. This country was the opposite of that. And to the point that I sat in a meeting and I thought, are they asking for a bribe to release the information? And I thought, no, I really must have misunderstood this, because it was being interpreted, right? It was not in English. I thought, no, I must have misinterpreted it. So the translator and I, or the interpreter and I, over coffee, I asked them, can I just test this out with you? Have I really got the wrong impression? And they said, I'm not sure. And I thought, okay, that to me sounds like I might not have got the wrong impression. So what did I do? Well, first of all, I was horrified. I'm not the sort of person who would pay a bribe. And also at that time, I was working on behalf of the UK government. So that clearly was not going to happen. So my immediate response was, I need to talk to my director, right? So, you know, that meeting had finished. So the immediate problem was over. I didn't need to do anything at that meeting. So I emailed, because I was overseas, got a slot in his secretary, a quick idea of what I wanted to talk about. And I said, look, I just want to test this out with you. A, do you think I'm misinterpreting? But B, what do you think in terms of handling this? because I was due to meet the ambassador, our British ambassador of that country, the next day. So I wanted to be crystal clear about my handling and what he would be comfortable with me doing. So how did I deal with that challenge? Well, I escalated it because I was feeling uncomfortable, and I tested out what I was thinking. And thirdly, then I agreed a strategy. So when I spoke to the ambassador the next day, I raised it, but I didn't raise it as a red flag because it was one individual. And I suggested it might be a good idea to look in this area because I may have misinterpreted the comment, but it seemed a little bit strange. There's potentially some issue with that ministry.
So tell us about any funny incident from your profession.
Funny incidents, yes. Okay, let me tell you one. So we had finished the passage of a law, so the Civil Contingencies Act 2004. Gone through Parliament, it had gained royal assent. So the Queen, as it was then, she came to close Parliament, she read out our bill had been passed, and we were literally in danger of not having our bill passed because we're on the last day. Our bill was still being debated by the House of Lords, so our upper chamber, and the House of Commons, our lower chamber, because we couldn't get them to agree on some wording. So we just got through by the skin of our teeth. Now, that evening, we were taken out by our Lords Minister. It was really nice. It was a small celebration. We got back into the office, and I sent an email, which I didn't know until the next day, but I sent an email out to thank all our stakeholders, to tell them what had happened and to thank them for their support. And unfortunately, all I managed to put in the message of my email was thank you. That was it. Thank you. And then my signature. And so my boss the next day said, well, Rachel, I've heard of short and sweet, but that really was short and sweet. And I said, sorry, I don't follow you. They said, your email yesterday. I said, oh, yes, I sent out a thank you email. Was it okay? They said, yes, except you just said thank you. I thought you might provide a bit of detail. So that's probably one of the moments where I still make myself laugh by that. But yeah, I followed it up with a fuller email, but people did laugh. Oh, you're welcome. What did we do?
So what's your mantra to tackle politicians?
Politicians. Well, I think it depends which side of the fence you're on. So what do I mean by that? So it's very different if you're a citizen or if you are a civil servant, right, working for them. So as a citizen, I think it's really important to make your voice known and heard. So I have no problem, and I write very frequently to my Member of Parliament to ask questions and to ask them, are they going to support particular things? Because it's something I'm really passionate about. So I'd really encourage people, to try and use whatever tools you have to hold them to account, because we elected them. Well, sometimes we didn't elect them personally, but we're participating in them being in positions of power. Now, I think it's different when you're a civil servant, because certainly in the UK, in the civil service, your role as a civil servant is to advise. You advise, ministers decide, right? And ultimately, decisions are as influenced by politics as they are by anything else, for example, an evidence base. And so there have been times where, shall we say, if I had been a politician, I would not have made the decision that they had when I worked for them. But ultimately, it's about realising there are distinctions. They're there to make a political decision, you're there to advise. But I've been really embracing my role as a citizen in terms of calling people to account. And also, for some time, I served as a councillor for our local government in Bradwell here. And that was a great experience, really trying to help people to get the most out of their local services and provision.
So, what was the thought process behind starting Partners for Reform?
Well, the thought process was simple to an extent. So I'd often thought about starting my own business. So I remember, back in 2001, buying a magazine which talked about running your own business. But the trouble was, Gaurav, I didn't really know on what, right? I didn't know to do. What is it that I'm called to start a business on? And so over the years, I developed a lot of experience with working directly with businesses, with business associations and trade bodies. And it struck me that I'd like to do what they do, right? I was really excited about it. So back in 2015, we had a new government. It was a coalition government, Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. And I started thinking, I think it's time for change. I was doing a lot of different work. I was working across 3 different sites in the UK, and I spent a lot of my time during the week traveling. And that was difficult for me. So I decided at this stage to think about the future. And I knew I enjoyed international work. So I'd spent some time working for the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. And I was country coordinator for Turkey, and I worked particularly in the Balkans. And I loved that. I really, I've got a strong sense of adventure. So I thought, well, maybe I can do something around that. I enjoy training. At that stage, I didn't have a qualification, but people said to me, you're good at this. You make things understandable. Yeah, I think you'd be great. So I decided in January 2016 that I was going to leave the civil service and establish my own company.
So as a founder, Partner for Reform, what are your roles and responsibilities?
Well, Gaurav, I'm everything. I really am the CEO, the Chief Operation Officer, Chief Financial Officer. I'm the cleaner. I'm the coffee maker. I really do everything. So in terms of roles and responsibilities, I will be running the business development. I'll be delivering, for example, training, capacity building. You might find me editing one week. You might find me sort of preparing myself to engage in a conference the next week. And I also have some formal legal responsibilities. My company is a limited company, so find me on Companies House website. And so I have to do things properly. I have to have proper business banking. I have to make sure that I fulfill all my responsibilities as a sole director. And I'm what the Companies Act calls the person with significant control in my company. So in other words, what I do, the buck always stops with me.
So what all products and services do Partner for Reform provides?
I provide a range of services, and I'd call them more services than products. So, for example, training, capacity building, coaching and mentoring, and analytical services. So maybe let's focus on a couple of those. So training tends to be around 2 areas. So firstly, around regulation. So whether that's sort of a particular new law or rule that people want to introduce, or whether that's they want to either introduce or improve their analytical capacity across government. And then the second area is around personal development and enhancement. So I train people on Chartered Management Institute level 5 and level 7 courses. So those are broadly equivalent to degree and postgraduate courses on how to become a coach and how to become a better manager and leader. So that's my focus around training.
So what are the core values which makes Partner for Reform unique and successful?
So to answer that question, I think it's really important to reflect on my own values, as I am the sole organizer, the sole director of the company. So I'm very, values focused. And what do I mean by that? I'm a strong believer in integrity. It's been said before, I'm very loyal, I'm honest, and I'm also very experienced focused. So in other words, I'm not materialistic. And how does this sort of impact on what I do? I'm not one, for example, who develops standard hacks or approaches to training. I'm a great believer that although we share similarities as humans, that we need to be understood as individuals. And so I like to think about my engagement with people as being unique. So all of us have unique issues and challenges. There may be some similarities, but there's always something slightly different. So curiosity for me is a really strong value, and wanting to deliver the best that I can. And I suppose lastly, I would say sustainability. So I used to, when I studied before I went into the civil service, I'd always struggle with this notion of when people did capacity development, this sort of fly in, fly out mentality that, people come in, they do something for someone and then they leave. Actually, for me, that's not what it should be about. It should be about sustainable change. So to use, almost the parable that we hear about, where Jesus teaching somebody to fish, don't fish for someone, give them one meal and leave, but think about and really commit to engaging them to solve their own problems. Because I really strongly believe that if you go in to someone's house, for example, and move their furniture around, right, which is what some capacity building activities can be like, as soon as you leave, they'll move it all back to where it was, because you have done it for them. They haven't done it for themselves. So to inspire, to create that sustainable change, I think are really important values too.
So how has been your journey from political analytics to founder to non-executive board member?
So that journey's been long, I would say. So the first thing I would say, and also secondly, it's ongoing, and it hasn't been linear. So the way that we talk, I think sometimes about careers, we talk about things being a stepping stone to something else. That might be so when you look back at it, but I'm not always sure we know that at the time when we make decisions, unless we're really self-aware. So for me, if we just think about this, I started as a political analyst back in the year 2000. And then I left that in 2016 and set up Partners for Reform, or Peak Wellbeing first, and then Partners for Reform. And then I became a non-executive board member to the British Hallmarking Council back in 2022. And that, what would I say about that journey? It's been iterative, and also for me, becoming a board member has been the point at which I can bring my experience of governance, of building accountability, and looking at behavioural change. Why is it that, for example, people will decide to still buy jewellery from online platforms where it would seem to be too good to be true? If you're paying £2 for a ring that purports to be 18 karat gold, it's highly unlikely that it's going to be. So it's bringing all of those experiences to bear to look at how we can create that change. So that's a little bit about my journey.
So what was the most challenging phase of your journey?
Yeah, I think the phase for me would be not long after the new coalition government had been formed. And let me say a bit about why. I had moved back from Paris. So when I worked for the OECD, I lived and worked in Paris. So I'd moved back from Paris. I'd moved to a new area of the UK. I'd met someone wonderful, who's now my husband. And I didn't know anyone in this area apart from him. I came back to work for the civil service, but not in London, right? Up here in Sheffield. And my boss was based in Birmingham. And I had rejoined this part of government. So many of the people knew me already. And with that familiarity, though, also comes certain levels of expectation. And I think we were all trying to work out, the senior leadership team and I, well, where do I fit? Right now, I've been away. I've done, I've worked on the Olympics. I've worked in Paris. I've done some really interesting things. What do I want now? And where do I best fit within the organization? How can I most add value? And coupled with those challenges, Gaurav, I was also traveling to Sheffield, to Birmingham, and to London every week. And it often felt like I had no control of my calendar because of that. Ministers were based in London. So, if you needed to do something that was ministerial based, you had to go. And for me, it was 3.5 hours each way to London. So, 7 hours gone of your day traveling. And the next day, I might need to travel to Birmingham, which would be another 2.5 hours each way. And so very quickly, I started feeling like I was getting really tired and struggling to almost losing my mojo. Yeah, struggling to feel like I was having an impact. And so that was, I would say, the most challenging part of the journey, because I started wondering, well, what's going on? Why can't I manage this? Because my instinctive response was, well, it's great. I've moved back. I've got this great job. But also I had a lot of pressures on me. I'd just become, sort of a step mum to 3 lovely children as well. So there were a lot of changes going on. So I think at that stage, I was really trying to grapple, okay, what should I be prioritizing and how do I feel about my job? And as I said to you earlier, it was no surprise perhaps that at the end of that year, the beginning of 2016, I decided it was time to leave to create my own business.
So what was the reason to wound down Peak Wellbeing?
For me, Peak Wellbeing, which I started in May of 2016, it had 2 parts of what I did. So the first was well-being. So I've always had an interest in how the mind and the body interact. When we're sick, how is that related to how we're feeling emotionally? I suffer, for example, from migraines, right? And, I'll be more susceptible to migraines at certain points. So I've always been really interested in the link between the mind and the body. So I trained and became qualified as a aromatherapist, a reflexologist, and a shiatsu practitioner. And I got my first level of qualification as a coach, as an executive coach. So I spent quite a bit of time doing that. And I also started my consultancy business. So working, for example, with governments such as India. And at that time, I had it all under one umbrella of Peak Wellbeing. And in 2018, it became clear that I was doing more consultancy work than my holistic health work. So I decided to really scale that back. And now I only practice with friends and family, as it takes up too much time to do the 2 well. So at that stage, back in early 2017, I decided to wind down Peak Wellbeing, although was still my tag on Instagram at the moment. And I created this limited company called Partners for Reform, focusing much more on training, development, and analytical and communications work.
So what is UK Civil Services all about?
UK Civil Service. Well, to reflect that term you used earlier, Gaurav, it's all about, from my perspective, it's serving the public. It's providing services to citizens. The right service provided at the right level for the most reasonable cost. And that for me is what the civil service could and should do. So, for example, whether you're looking for a passport, a driving license, or to be paid your pension, that's in essence what the civil service is there to do. And, civil servants provide that service by doing that, to have a citizen mindset, and also to provide evidence, to keep themselves updated, to provide evidence on potential new law or policy, and to advise ministers.
So what is the procedure to join civil services in UK?
So there are many different routes, in fact. So, for example, there's something that's called the fast stream. So that's a little bit like is it called IAS in India?
Yeah.
I think,
IAS.
Yeah. So this scheme is aimed at people who've got really high potential. And so you go through a selection process, and many people, they'll come down right to the last one or two sort of boards and just not be successful. But it's a really great way to get yourself a lot of different experience across a lot of different ministries before you decide perhaps which one you want to specialise in. So that's one way you can join. And that tends to be graduate and beyond level. Now, you can join an individual department, as we call them, or ministries, as some will still call them, and those sort of jobs are freely available. You can find those online, and for many of those you don't need to have a degree. You need to have your basic level of maths and English and other qualifications, and it really does depend what sort of role that you want. So, for example, if you are having more of what I'd call a citizen-focused role, so you might be in a job centre helping people to locate a job after unemployment, or someone coming back into the workplace, maybe, for example, after suffering from COVID-related conditions. The skills and attributes there will be much more people-focused. You'll need to have more sort of coaching experience, and you'll need to have more skills dealing with perhaps, having difficult conversations and showing personal resilience. If you're working in policy, they might, but not necessarily, be looking for degree level experience. They might want experience of people who've worked in businesses in the past. So there are lots of different sort of routes to entry. It really just does depend on what the focus is at the time, and secondly, what the level of vacancies are. So perhaps similar to some countries, I would observe there are cycles for recruitment. So sometimes there are freezes on recruitment. In other words, we mustn't recruit anyone else for the next year. And other times there's a real crisis. There are insufficient number or the types of civil servant that are needed. So just as an example, Gaurav, one of the main areas that people are looking at the moment are around digital skills. It's not a skill set that a civil servant who might have been in for 10 or 15 years would necessarily have. So, your recruitment pool and strategy needs to be different. And so some departments will bring people in for maybe a year or 2 years, or even on a secondment basis. And I think that's a really good idea to build the complementary set of skills that a modern civil service needs nowadays.
So tell us about the British Hallmarking Council.
So the British Hallmarking Council, so they are the body that supervises the work of the 4 assay offices in the UK. So, for example, this is a gold ring. How do I know it's gold? Well, it tells me a story. These little symbols in here will tell a story. They will tell me what percentage of gold the ring is. They will tell me who has stamped it, who's given the assurance that it is gold, and who the maker was. And so this industry is extremely old. It dates back well beyond 250 years. And it's one of the success stories, I think, of the UK. And so what the Hallmarking Council does, we are the regulator for hallmarking in the UK. And so we are there to make sure that where that metal is stamped, that is correct. And secondly, that when these metals are sold, when it says, for example, they are 18 karat gold or 9 karat gold, that the retailer has checked and that they have to display what we call a dealer's notice so that consumers can understand what the quality symbols mean and that they know what it is that they're paying for.
So now if somebody want to check the code which is written on your ring, where that code can be checked?
Oh, so that can be checked at the British Hallmarking Council website. So if anyone were to Google that, you'll get then a link to the dealer's notice on there. And it's really fascinating. You know, all 4 assay offices, and we used to have many more, but we now have 4. They all have their own individual symbols. So, it's really interesting. We have a castle, we have a lion, we have a rose, for example. The history is fascinating. So you just need a little one of these special microfine glasses and you can learn a lot about the history of an item.
So what about your roles and responsibility and achievements as non-executive board member of the British Hallmarking Council?
So I preface what I'm going to say with, I haven't been there that long. We're really fortunate. We've now had 2 face-to-face meetings. And, as people experience with boards, the board meeting is a moment in time, but so much else happens around them. And so I was asked to become chair of the Education and Enforcement Committee, which I accepted. And I think that's one of the main achievements I'd point to at the moment. I've become really involved in trying to understand more about hallmarking as a trade and an industry. So, for example, I went along for an enforcement visit with Sheffield Assay Office to York, where we went to check, are the retailers displaying their dealer's notice? The vast majority of them were, but those who weren't, there was only a very small percent who did not know that they needed to. It's a legal obligation. So we've been raising awareness of the requirements. And secondly, I'm personally pushing for more work to be done with the online platforms. So unfortunately, Gaurav, there is a problem that certainly in the UK, that when people purchase on online platforms, I think they assume that there's a greater level of protection and assurance than there actually is. So, for example, if you were to purchase a piece of jewellery from one of the online platforms, such as potentially Amazon or eBay, and the Amazon or eBay aren't the actual seller, right? That somebody else is using the platform as a place to sell. Amazon and eBay will tell you it's the seller's responsibility to make sure that, and on one level, completely understandable. However, we believe that customers think that there is more control and regulation around this than there is. And, as I said, I think when we started today, I said, if someone purchases a ring for £2 that's supposed to be 18 karat gold, it's highly unlikely to be the case. So I think possibly consumers are aware that there are all that purports to be gold is not always. But I think there's more that we can do. So we're working with government to try and change that, and also with the online platforms to look at, well, where can they help to improve compliance? Because ultimately, the reviews that the sellers get are low quality because people are complaining that this is poor quality, it isn't gold, it isn't silver. Why are you selling something that isn't this case? So there's some of the roles and responsibilities. I'm also a member of the governance working group. So I bring a great deal of experience from my time in government. So, for example, looking at the chair's appointment process, the remuneration process, and providing advice, challenge, and guidance on governance issues.
So, what's that one thing you love about your journey and the profession the most?
Oh, the one thing I love is how much freedom and flexibility I now have to engage with people that I respect and that I'm inspired by. So I feel really fortunate. You know, I've had a fantastic career in the civil service, both in the UK and with the OECD in Paris. And one of the things that's given me is the opportunity to create my own business. So I can work with people that I like, that inspire me, and I can respectfully say no to those people or projects I don't want to work with. So I've been really fortunate, and I've met some amazing people, and I firmly believe that we have so much to learn, and we can gain that from conversation. So, such as hopefully we're having today, Gaurav. Your questions are really interesting and thought-provoking for me.
So, who is your mentor in your professional journey?
So, I've had a few mentors, and I'll mention two of them, and I hope they don't mind being named. So, the first would be Hugh McNeil. And Q and I first worked together in the civil service back in sort of 2007 time. And the reason he's been my mentor is he has great insight. So he's a great champion of equality and diversity. And he suggested that I put myself forward for a leadership program aimed at underrepresented groups in the civil service, to which I said, I don't need that, do I? Why do I need that? And he said, no, I think you should. You'd be great. You know, it would really, really be good for you. So he's always been there to push and support me. And we carried on sort of having that mentor relationship throughout my different workplaces, and including to now. I'm always sort of happy to give him a call and chat through things with him. And nowadays we tend to have quite nice social meetings too, which is nice now that there's no kind of line manager dynamic there. And the second person is Graham Russell. So Graham is a director at the Chief Executive Officer now at the Office of Product Safety and Standards for the Department of Business and Trade. And Graham is a fantastic individual, very highly motivated. I met him many years ago, about the same time as Hugh, 2007, and I was involved in the recruitment of Graham and subsequently worked for him. And I now do the occasional sort of piece of work for the department overseas. And Graham is just truly inspirational. He's very motivated, but he's also very people focused and does a lot outside of work to improve his community and overseas. So I've got great respect for both of them.
So what was your first award and what does award means to you?
I will have to dig back to school for this. I won. They introduced awards when I was in fifth form, so 15, and I got an award for the next 3 years when I was there for sixth form too. And those awards were all around academic endeavour. So I worked hard. You know, I enjoyed it. Yes, I got called a swot at school. But, you know, as I said to you earlier, I've always been interested in why people do things, you know, why and how. So I think that's why the award came to me. And, you know, I've had a smattering of these things in terms of sports. And what I would like to do is at some point to look at the sort of awards in my area. So, for example, I've got accreditations. Yeah, so those are forms of reward. I'm a member, for example, the Charter Management Institute, the Association of Coaching. But that's one of the reasons that I'm looking to gain chartership status with the Charter Management Institute, because I think it's really important. It's all about, so you asked me, what do awards mean to me? They're about continued development and about learning and achievement and being the best you can. So I said I'm competitive. Probably people would tell you I'm competitive with others too, and I'm sure there's an element of that. But mainly I'm competitive with myself. So my little Fitbit here that always gets me going reminds me I haven't done as many steps today as I have yesterday. And so I'm always striving to just go a bit further, just achieve a bit more.
So what does success mean to you, and what is the role of hard work, smart work, and luck in achieving success?
Success to me is around knowing what you want to achieve and creating a path to achieve that and overcoming challenges when you encounter them. So there's that lovely phrase around doing deliberative or intensive practice. So I think it might come from Benjamin Bloom, professor at University of Chicago, who talked about those 10,000 hours. You must practice, you must do things for 10,000 hours in order to be competent or to become an expert. And we see that, I think, with musicians, we see that with sports people. But I think that's to some extent important for us all. It's around a deliberative practice. Know what it is that you want and make time, book in the time to achieve that. And within that, Gaurav, I think for me, there's something there about being happy, right? So making sure you do something that makes you happy and giving yourself enough room to stretch. So create a little bit of positive stress, but not too much, right? Enough challenge that every day you genuinely feel like you've done something in addition or different, or you've learned something new. That's how I do it. And then the second part of your question then was around luck, right? Yeah. So I think this is a really interesting one. I think if you looked at a lot of the theory around people's motivations and success, historically, they would say luck plays no part. And I think that's shifting. And personally, I don't agree. I think luck does play a role. So, for example, I was fortunate to be born where I was. I was fortunate to have all my basic needs met as a child. And where we're born is an example from my perspective of luck. I don't think that's preordained. I could have equally have been born in Afghanistan and would have had an entirely different set of opportunities and potential life outcomes. So I think luck is important, and I think it has more influence than we assume it does. I'm a firm believer in hard work, and that ethic definitely comes from my mum. So my mum and my family are Irish, and they all worked incredibly hard, most of them leaving the homestead and then emigrating to England, to Australia, to America to forge new lives for themselves. A really difficult time, as it was then living in Ireland. So I've definitely got that work ethic. However, I have been really trying to learn from people as I've gone along my journey. They talk about not just working hard, but working smartly. So I use technology as much as I can now. So for example, I voice dictate. Sometimes when I'm starting, I've got to start a document and I've got a blank sheet of paper. That can be a barrier for me. So I will voice dictate my ideas. So at least they'll be down and then I can move them around once I've got them out of my head. And I'll use all sort of the great starts of the AI-enabled Microsoft. For example, with design ideas for your PowerPoint slides, for creating, scheduling, when it picks up, you said you were going to do this. Have you done it yet? Do you want me to add it as a deadline? So I definitely try to work smarter. And I've adopted some techniques that some celebrities apparently use extremely well. So for example, Bezos, who I'd say I have mixed feelings, like many people around the world, about Bezos. But one of the things that he is supposed to do is to group activities together. So for example, if you need to do some administration across 3 days, choose one day to do it and choose a certain slot, because then your brain isn't having to switch between multiple ideas and thoughts. And I'd say that, Gaurav, as I perhaps get a little bit more mature, I find my brain feels like it's becoming like a computer where it needs to be defragged and it needs to work on maybe 3 applications as opposed to 10 different programs at the same time. So I'm trying to group things together, and I'm finding I'm becoming a bit more productive because of that.
So if you were able to get hold of time machine, which phase of your life would you like to go?
So if it was just for a holiday, then with a time machine, I would go back to my childhood. Probably I was about 10, so just before I went up to secondary school. And why would that be? My mum worked in the docks in a place called Tilbury, which for me, again, it's by the coast. But we used to, in the summer, go up with her. My dad would drive up every day because my dad was a history lecturer, actually, and he would be off in the summer. So we'd drive up every day and we'd have these beautiful, long, hot summers. And my brother and I used to be out with my dad having picnics, having fizzy drinks that we weren't usually allowed to have, being allowed sweets that we weren't really allowed to have. And we just had a lovely time. And he used to take us to places, for example, to the docks in Tilbury, which is where he set sail on his journey to Africa when he was out there teaching. And it was just a magical time for us, lots of discovery. So that's where I'd go.
So what does leadership means to you, and what are the quality of a leader according to you?
Leadership for me is around a vision. So both the power to be able to create a compelling vision, but also to have worked with others around you to get their ideas and where you can to try and gain a consensus. Because I think vision's all very well, but it needs to have some element of being shared, right? There need to be some shared objectives with that. And how do I think that's operable? For me, it's around leading from your highest purpose. So people often talk about having integrity and perhaps even more so being authentic, right? So being your authentic self. Find that all over the literature nowadays. Now, what does that mean? For me, that means doing something that you are passionate about. So when you lead from that, I think you are unstoppable. You can bring teams together. You can change the entire way things are done. For example, in the Olympics, we genuinely were, as a society, it felt like, all lined up and signed up to the vision of delivering a great Olympic Games for the world. And that really, it did feel in the street. It's something you could feel. People weren't going, oh, the train's late or the weather's bad. They weren't having some of those British conversations. There was a real passion there. And you asked me about qualities. Yeah. Well, there are many. Let me perhaps pick out a few. The quality of being innovative. So always thinking about the status quo. What could we change? How could we change it? Developing others. I think someone who's truly a leader is always thinking about the development of their team and people they engage with. Being inspirational, motivational. So, acting in a way that others want to be. They want to emulate something that they see. And also being humble. So, understanding that we don't know everything in life and we never will, but knowing what we know and knowing how to engage others who know, and understanding that sometimes there are no easy answers for difficult situations. I think being honest about that is very empowering, but for me it's a sign of a true leader. Knowing your limitations, being collaborative, and two last ones, having foresight, right? So, thinking strategically, but having foresight, to ask those questions. What if? What if? Not this is how it is now, but what if and how? How could we change this? And trying to think a little bit differently. So that term people use, thinking outside the box. I'd say, what if?
So how do you make your work-life balance?
Oh, well, if you know the answer to that, Gaurav, please do let me know, because I think this is a constant challenge for all of us, isn't it? The first thing I would say is, if you work in something that you're passionate about, then that balance will naturally fall, right? You will find the right space to do that. The second thing I would say is, I think that this fluctuates in your career. So, for example, if you are a parent, if you are looking after elderly relatives or sick relatives, your priorities and what you think will be acceptable for your work-life balance will shift. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because that's an observation I make of myself over the last few years. And secondly, I suppose I'd say, or thirdly, so my strategy would be to be really self-aware. So I know when I'm most productive. I'm an early bird, right? I do not work well late at night, right? And I know as a result of that I need to do the work I find most challenging earlier in the morning. So as long as I'm able to plan and schedule my sort of work schedule to solve that and address that, then that means that the work-life balance will naturally fall into place. Now, I'm not saying I never do things at the weekend. Absolutely not. I'm not saying I don't work really early in the morning or late at night. I do, because that's the nature of my work with different clients. But it's how I feel about it in here that matters, right? If I'm not happy in here, then that means my balance is out. So I need to readjust. And I do ask myself, I go through every 3 months, have I got this right? How am I feeling? Am I exhausted? What have I done to, for example, on my coaching course? Am I up to date with my assignments, right? Am I still happy with the amount of energy, effort here? So I think it's maybe the holy grail to some extent, but it's also a really good discipline to say, where am I? And for me, it's, if there's a disconnect between the head and the heart, if my heart's feeling heavy, that's normally a sign that my balance isn't quite right and I need to do something about it.
So what advice would you like to give to young political analysts?
Well, to wish them good luck and to invest in time for planning. So whether they have started their career journey or whether they are looking to start their career journey, to be as clear as they can be. What sort of organisations do they want to work for? What is it that they want to influence? So, for example, is it to reduce violence? Is it to empower gender equality? Is it to reduce poverty? Is it to make the world safer and more secure. Those are all our reasons, and there are many more, for choosing a career in political analysis. So I think I'd urge anyone to really to think through what is it they're really interested and motivated by, and then to seek employment with those sorts of organisations. And if they don't have, for example, experience yet, then to reach out and to find people who have that experience, who might be already working for those organisations, and see if they have, for example, the opportunity to maybe bring them in to do a day or two shadowing or an internship, anything to give them an idea of what's it like to work here, would I enjoy it?
So what would be your advice for graduates who are just entering the professional world?
So for graduates, well, depending which country you're coming from, you're probably going to have a lot of debt. And the first thing I would say is don't panic. You've invested in your future. Now you have to decide what you're going to do. So if you know what you want to do, if you're really clear on the sort of work you want to do, the companies you want to work for, then apply. Make sure that your CV is as good as it can be. And I would reach beyond your university career centre for this. Ask your friends and family who are already working, ask them for a review. Secondly, I would use LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a fantastic professional platform, and even the free of charge version is a great step into the world of professional networking. And it's a great way to build up your learning too. Thirdly, I would say look at your contacts list, right? Network. Now, some people don't like the term networking, but you learn so much from other people. And there's that lovely phrase that I've heard before, that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them in proportion. So this is a great stage for you to find out, what do you like doing? What are the good things that people like from their jobs or the companies, and what are the things they're less keen on, to help you get a really solid understanding of, do I want to work there? What will I gain from it? And also to start thinking about, what does your perfect job or set of responsibilities look like? Because once you know that, then you can start to work back and say, okay, so maybe I could apply here. If I worked here for 3 years, that might give me some insights, right? There are many doors open to you. The key thing is to know which ones to approach first. And if the doors are closed, to know how loud to knock. And if they're still closed, then to build up the contacts to help you open those doors, because people want you to succeed and they'll be really delighted to help you to grow and develop on your journey.
So there are many articles on the web, if you see, about the entrepreneur, that you should not be a one-man army. And as you have told that you are a CEO, CFO, cleaner, marketing person, so you are a one-man army. So what would be your advice on this statement?
Well, I think there's different ways to be a one-man or a one-woman army. So I guess I'm a one-woman army, but I'm also supported by a lot of great people. So for example, my husband is just excellent at providing so much support to me, right from his great barista skills. I always get a couple of excellent cups of coffee that keep me going in the day. And he's always someone that I can bounce ideas off. And one of the key issues, I think, when you're an entrepreneur and you predominantly work by yourself, right, is making sure that you're networking with people, because it can become lonely. It's not the same as being in an office or even a hybrid office environment every day. So I think it's really important to make time and space for people that you like, respect, and maybe you've worked with in the past. So I have a number of associates who I work with and I subcontract with, and that helps to give a sense of almost like a workplace environment. So, these are trusted people that I can have candid conversations with and also discuss issues, when I need a second opinion or I'm not quite sure on my handling or my instinct on something.
So what are your life lessons which you would like to share on our show?
First thing I say is life is not guaranteed. Just because you've woken up today does that not mean you're going to wake up tomorrow. So really everything could be your last. No one plans to die. Well, with the exception of a few, we don't plan the moment we're going to pass away. And so live the life that energizes you. Think about every day as if it could be your last. And so I always say, never go to sleep on an argument, and make sure people know how you feel about them when you and they are alive. I lose track, and I don't know whether this is culturally an issue, for example, in this part of the world, but I've lost people in my life, as we all do, and the amount of people who will make time to come to a funeral, and they speak so fondly of the person who's passed away, but they haven't been in touch with them for so long. And I always think the living years are the important ones. So make time for people. Tell them what they mean to you. Secondly, experiences are more valuable than possessions, right? I've already said I am not materialistic in the slightest. On my deathbed, I am not going to remember my new iPad. I'm going to remember my experience of swimming in the sea with the sun on my face. I'm going to remember climbing the top of a mountain with my husband. I'm going to remember my wedding day. These are the things I'm going to remember, not money. So for me, experiences are crucial. Thirdly, take some time to exercise every day. So even if it's just a few minutes walk outside, quick high intensity workout. So I'm always on YouTube doing, just a few minutes a day. It's just about that energy. You need to shift the chi, shift the energy, and keep yourself fresh. As I said, I like swimming, but also I like doing this outside. So when we've had tough days, and we all have them, there's nothing more grounding for me than being outside. It reminds me that I am a small cog in a very big world. And that's really, really nice. It puts everything into perspective. No one has died in the day, then the day has been good as long as I can get outside. Number 5, don't waste time and energy on energy vampires. Right? For those of you like Harry Potter and have read or seen the Dementors, these are people who, for some reason, you've attracted, right, in part of your life, but they drag you down. You feel stressed or they're depleting you somehow. So look at these people. Why are they in your life? Can you shift either their energy or yours? Because it will impact on you if you have too many people like this. 6thly, keep learning, meet new people, ask questions. I think the day I stop learning is probably when I'm on my deathbed. Number 7, a phrase I first heard from the exotic Marigold Hotel. And everyone says that they don't know where it's from, but let me repeat it. Everything will be okay in the end. If it's not okay, then it's not the end. And that, to me, whoever said it, summarizes how fleeting we are, right? So our emotions, however we feel in one moment of time, that can change. And it's all about the bigger picture. So, don't sweat the small stuff, right? This stuff alters and changes. It's all about thinking about the bigger picture. So don't panic. Number 8, enjoy the journey. Slow down, right? We're all too busy doing things, yeah? I remember when I left one of my jobs, someone gave me a Mr. Men book, if you know Mr. Men by Roger Hargreaves, and it was Mrs. Busyness, or maybe it was Mr. Busyness and they'd added an S. So it was supposed to be about me. And that for me was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, I am quite busy. What are they trying to say about me? But it's about finding the tools and techniques to give yourself and your brain time off to recharge, to rejuvenate, right? Yes, with our gadgets, we can be on 24/7, but who is that benefiting? I know I can't do my best work when I'm always connected. And number 9, surround yourself with a range of people, not just people who are like you, who think like you, enjoy the things that you do. Now, I think we can do that when we choose our friendship group, but we don't learn anything from that. We've got a big, wide world out there. And, I think we can learn so much from people who are different than us. It's a great sort of humbling experience. And then lastly, Gaurav, the one thing, again, this is debated where it comes from, but I love the sentiments, and it's this: watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. And watch your habits, for they become your character. And that for me is always a really good reminder of the power of thinking. Our neuroplasticity. I truly believe that we can be who we want to be. The key thing is to know that and to be able to exercise that. And so if I'm having a bad day, I'll go back to that phrase to remind myself, this is interesting. Why are you thinking in this way? Look at how it can have a ripple effect.
So now we will start our rapid round.
Yep.
So an employed or an entrepreneurship journey?
Entrepreneurship, without a doubt. 100%.
Success in one line?
Spend time to understand your inner drivers and use these as your strengths, and you'll be contented.
So choose anyone, luck, hard work or smart work to achieve success.
Smart work.
Your favorite destination?
My favourite destination is Southwold.
Your favorite adventure?
My favourite adventure? Well, from things I've done so far, it's a trip to Egypt when I was a student. So why was it so good? I had minimal money, so I had to think innovatively about experiences, and I got to watch the Sound and Light show at Giza on the top of a retailer's roof, and given a can of Coke by them. And when you know what it's like when you're a student and don't have many resources, kindness like that is a wonderful thing.
Your favorite actor and actress?
Okay, so actress would be Penelope Cruz. I just think she embodies vulnerability with just superb range of acting skills. And my favourite actor would be the Irish actor Gabriel Byrne, who I think is quite a dark, smouldering character, but very versatile.
Your favourite colour?
If I had to choose one, it would be pink. But if I'm allowed more than one, it'd be pink, blue and red.
Your favourite country?
Oh, this is really difficult. Okay, so I'll have to go back to my roots. It'll have to be Ireland. And that's because of my family.
So at last, one line that defines you.
Just flipping do it.
So thank you very much for this lovely conversation and sharing your life experience, challenges, and your story on our show. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Gaurav. I really appreciate your time too.
Bye, friend.